sweetheart. The tour guides park around back. I'll have Ensign Briggs handle the visitor." The voice came across Operations Conference Room 2 before the man finished standing up. Captain Devereaux Whitlock, 52, 28 years a surface warfare officer, Annapolis class of 1994, commanding officer of Naval Submarine Base Kings Bay, Georgia. Coffee cup in his left hand. Folder in his right. His ring caught the overhead fluorescent and threw a small white circle onto the polished mahogany of the conference table. He had thrown the line over his shoulder without looking at her. He looked at the Belgian rear admiral at her side instead, and smiled like a man who had decided that the rear admiral was the only person in the room he was going to need. It was 13:45 on a Monday afternoon in late April, the 27th, the first day of a NATO partner familiarization visit at Naval Submarine Base, Kings Bay. The Trident submarine fleet of the Atlantic Force lived 8 miles down the road, behind 2 layers of fence and a tide gate. The base proper smelled of cut Bermuda grass and diesel and the faint Georgia humidity that arrived in late April every year. The flag at the headquarters mast was at full hoist. Operations Conference Room 2 had been swept the night before by the master-at-arms on duty, and the dust on the Venetian blinds was at the level the manual called for and the captain remembered. The woman in the navy blazer stood half a pace behind Rear Admiral Lucien de Wolf of the Belgian Navy, 6 paces inside the doorway. Her badge said, "Mitchell, S, Protocol VIP Escort." It hung from a clip on the lapel of a blazer that had been pressed at the airport hotel in Jacksonville at 1100. Gray slacks, low flats, a small silver hair clip, a leather portfolio. Her hands rested at her sides, fingers loose, palms half open. No jewelry, no earrings. A thin chain at her neck that ran down inside her blouse and that nobody in the room had thought about. Her eyes did the thing eyes did when their owner had spent enough years in unfamiliar rooms that the act had become preconscious. The cameras above the doorframe, the HVAC vent at the far wall, the 2 exits, the serial number stenciled in white on the housing of the fire suppression panel 4 feet behind Captain Whitlock's right shoulder. The captain. She did not respond to the captain. She did not turn toward the door. She filed the serial number in the place she filed serial numbers, and she settled her weight onto her back foot, the way a person settled their weight when they did not yet know whether a room was a room or a problem. Rear Admiral de Wolf, 56, did not move. A tall, thin man with a clean white head of hair, a French mustache, and a face that did not smile easily. He had been a clearance diver in the 80s. He had served 3 tours with the Belgian Special Operations Component and 7 years at NATO Command in Mons. He understood American naval officers, the way a man who has worked in glass shops understands glass. He let his gaze pass over Whitlock and pass over the executive officer Commander Halbert, a 46-year-old man with a tired face and a small frown he had been wearing for 19 months. Then he let his gaze rest on the woman in the navy blazer at his side. He spoke under his breath, 3 words in French that the captain of NSB Kings Bay did not understand. "Monsieur, vous venez de faire une grande erreur." The room had 3 department heads at the conference table, and an ensign at the side door, and a coffee carafe on a wooden tray. The carafe was 3/4 full. The 3rd department head looked at his hands. Halbert looked at the table. The ensign at the door looked at the woman in the navy blazer, and then looked at his shoes. Captain Whitlock did not understand French. He did not need to. He waved at the door. He gestured at the ensign. He spoke at the rear admiral around the woman in the blazer, the way a man at a barbecue might gesture past a child to get the attention of an adult. "Briggs, show the protocol officer to her quarters. Then take Rear Admiral de Wolf through the brief. The only people in this room who need to be here are the ones in uniform." 2 passageways outboard of Operations Conference Room 2, behind the steel hatch that opened onto the headquarters quarterdeck, Master Chief Khatun Ali, 47, 26 years a Navy SEAL, 11 years at the Naval Special Warfare Training Detachment, set his coffee cup on the wide concrete rail of the quarterdeck because the captain's voice had reached him through the open hatch, and the coffee cup had no longer been an object he wanted to be holding. The mug had been a Christmas present from his daughter. It had been hot when he heard the captain's voice. It was cold now. He did not move. The woman in the navy blazer crossed the threshold of Operations Conference Room 2, walked the 8 paces of corridor to the quarterdeck, and her shoes did not make a sound on the grated decking. 26 years of standing watches, and Khatun Ali could not remember a civilian who had crossed the headquarters quarterdeck of a naval submarine base in low flats without the metal speaking. He turned his head 1 degree. He did not pick up the mug. By 13:55, Captain Whitlock had moved on. He had the rear admiral seated at the head of the conference table, and Halberd was running a slide deck on the Atlantic exercise, and the protocol officer, in his head, had been escorted to the BOQ and was no longer a feature of his afternoon. She had not been escorted to the BOQ. Briggs, 24, a 4th-generation Navy ensign from Newport News, whose grandmother had been the first woman in her family to wear khakis, had walked her to the courtesy badge desk and asked her where she would like to go. She had looked at the base map the duty clerk handed her. She had asked Briggs whether the Rear Admiral's itinerary included a familiarization walkthrough of Range 2 and the SDV training bay that afternoon. Briggs said yes, 1600. She had said, "I will accompany the Rear Admiral's delegation as a courtesy escort. Please tell the duty officer." Briggs had nodded and had not gone back to ask the captain. She walked the quarterdeck to the courtyard. Master Chief Khatun Ali noted the second crossing without turning his head. 26 years and 2 civilians in low flats had been able to cross his quarterdeck and not speak to the metal. The first had been a 50-year-old contractor from Naval Sea Systems in 2017 who had been a SEAL chief in the early 90s. Ali did not allow himself to draw conclusions from a sample of 2. He poured the cold coffee out at the rail and refilled the mug. Range 2 opened onto the south side of the headquarters complex, behind a wire fence and a concrete berm. Senior Chief Petty Officer Antoine Boudreau, 44, Cajun, 26 years a corpsman and weapons NCO, had set the range at 1540 for a 15-minute familiarization fire by recruit apprentice Holiday, 20, a first-line shooter on her second week of qualifying. The senior chief had picked Holiday because Holiday could shoot. Ensign Briggs led the rear admiral, the woman in the navy blazer, and a small entourage of base public affairs personnel to the firing line at 1604. He narrated. The woman stood at the back with DeWolf. Holiday settled. Holiday fired 3. Holiday's 4th round failed to chamber. Briggs froze in the middle of a sentence. The public affairs lieutenant looked at the dirt. Boudreau stepped forward. Holiday locked the bolt to the rear. She dropped the magazine. She inspected the chamber. She set the magazine on the bench. She did all of this in 7 seconds. Boudreau nodded. He looked at the magazine on the bench. He looked at the lot number stamped on the floor plate. The woman in the navy blazer leaned slightly toward Rear Admiral DeWolf and spoke under her breath. In French, 3 sentences. Boudreau, who had picked up enough French in 4 deployments to the south coast of Louisiana and 1 to Djibouti to follow a basic line, heard the words, failure to feed, and spring fatigue, and le numéro de série, and a 5-digit set of numbers that ended in 73. He looked again at the magazine on the bench. He did not bend over to read the lot. He did not need to. He had pulled 4 magazines from the lot that ended in 7-3 that morning, and had drawn the rest from the rack, because the lot ending in 7-3 had been on the recall list since February 19th, and the recall had come from Naval Special Warfare Command, signed at the top by an admiral whose name Boudreaux had not bothered to remember at the time. He had remembered it now. He did not write it down. The line moved on. The familiarization fire ended at 16:45. The rear admiral thanked Briggs. Briggs walked the delegation toward the SDV training bay. The woman in the navy blazer did not speak again on the path. Her shoes did not speak to the gravel. She spent 40 minutes on the catwalk of the SDV barn, watching a Mark 11 vehicle on the rotation. The bay smelled of warm rubber and salt water and JP-5. The duty SDV chief, who had cleared her presence under Commander Bessler's signature, narrated in the tone a man used when he believed his audience could not follow a sentence with more than 2 clauses. She listened without taking notes. The catwalk railing was painted yellow and was 28 inches above the deck. The deck was open grating. A clipboard at the end of the railing slid in the draft of the bay door and went over. Without looking, the woman in the navy blazer put her hand out, and the clipboard came down into it. She set the clipboard back on the rail. The duty SDV chief did not see it. The lieutenant from public affairs saw it and forgot that he had seen it. She walked back to the BOQ at 2000. The headquarters quarterdeck was warm. Khatun Ali was on his second mug of coffee. She crossed the deck, and her low flats did not speak to the metal. She nodded to him. He did not nod back. He turned his head one further degree. At 2100, she sat down on the made bed in BOQ Building 12, room 204, and opened the oxblood leather notebook on her knee and wrote 3 digits. 312. The serial number on the depth log unit she had read from the catwalk 40 minutes ago. The Mark 11 that Petty Officer First Class Mateo Salinas had been riding the morning of March 17th, 2026, 23 miles off the Georgia coast, when the unit had failed to register descent below 34 feet, and Salinas had fought the controls for 92 seconds and had nearly drowned before the safety diver got him to the surface. The mishap report had logged the depth log unit on Salinas's vehicle as serial number 374. She closed the notebook. Senior Chief Antoine Baudreaux walked off Range 2 at 2040 and stopped at the master log desk. He flipped the master log forward 8 pages to the magazine lot record. He found the entry for the 7-3 lot. He read the serial range. He took his cover off his head, turned the underside up, took the pen from his blouse pocket, and wrote a single 5-digit number on the inside band of his cover. He had not written anything on the inside band of his cover in 19 years. He set the cover back on his head. He walked to Liberty. At 21:30, Captain Whitlock called a no-notice command brief in Operations Conference Room 1. He filled the room with Halberd, Bessler, Lieutenant Commander Pace from the visiting SDV team, 3 department heads, 2 ensigns, the senior public affairs officer, and the chief staff officer for the Atlantic exercise. He seated DeWolf and the woman in the navy blazer in the visitor row at the back. The room had not had a no-notice brief at 21:30 in 3 years. He spent 40 minutes on the upcoming exercise. He referenced 4 safety waivers he had signed in the previous fortnight. He referenced his authority. He referenced his classmate Commander Bessler's command of the training detachment. He smiled at Bessler twice. He did not look at the visitor row. At 22:05, he turned the floor over. "Madam Protocol Officer," his voice carried. He waited until the woman in the navy blazer looked up. "Since you appear to have such opinions about how the United States Navy conducts its business, why don't you share your wisdom with the room? The floor is yours. Or perhaps we could move on to actual business." Halberd snickered. Bessler smiled. Bessler leaned a quarter-inch toward Pace and said, at the volume of a man who wanted the visitor row to hear it, "Good. Some entertainment for once." Pace did not laugh. The public affairs lieutenant looked at his shoes. The chief staff officer for the Atlantic exercise looked at his watch as if the watch had answers. The senior public affairs officer looked at the coffee carafe. The ensign at the side door looked at the deck plates. Pace looked at Bessler. The woman in the navy blazer did not stand. She lowered her leather portfolio onto her knee. She set both feet on the floor. She spoke at the volume of a person who knew that a room would lean forward to hear her if she did not speak louder. "Sir, why was Mark 11 Vehicle 312's depth log unit swapped for Unit 374 within 72 hours of the March 17th mishap?" The room did not move. Bessler's face went still. Pace's mouth opened and closed. The public affairs lieutenant looked at the chief staff officer. The chief staff officer looked at the table. Halbert looked at the captain. Captain Whitlock laughed once, sharp, the laugh of a man who had decided in the same eighth of a second that the question was a coincidence. "Routine maintenance. Now sit down." She did not sit. She also did not press. She lowered her gaze to the leather portfolio on her knee, the way a person lowered her gaze when she had heard exactly the answer she had expected. Bessler's smile thinned by the width of a thread and recovered. The captain looked around the room. He picked up the slide deck remote. He moved on. In the back row of the visitor section, 2 seats behind the woman in the navy blazer, Petty Officer Second Class Quint Mackler, 28, a SEAL on the visiting SDV team, and the safety diver who had pulled Salinas to the surface on March 17th, looked at the floor between his boots. He had not been listed as a witness on the mishap board. He had assumed that was because his statement had not added anything. The woman in the navy blazer had not turned her head. She had marked his face the moment she walked in. She had marked his name on the orders roster taped to the conference room door. She had marked his absence from the witness list 2 weeks ago at her desk at Coronado. She did not turn to look at him now. She did not need to. She closed the portfolio. Her left hand rested across the front of her navy blazer at the precise level where a sword belt sat at parade rest. She did not notice she had done it. Captain Whitlock laughed again, and the laugh carried out into the passageway. "Tell the protocol officer her tour ends in the morning. Briggs, see her to her quarters." Briggs did not move. Bessler did not move. Halbert looked at the table. Whitlock looked around the room. "Did I stutter, gentlemen?" If watching a Navy captain laugh at a question like that, one makes you want to throw something across the room, you are not the only person in the courtyard tonight. Subscribe to Honor Tales. Every soldier carries a story like this one, and there is a reason the patient ones win. By 0730 Tuesday morning, Captain Whitlock had turned his machine on her. He had walked into the quarterdeck himself at 0650 in service khaki and had given the duty officer 4 sentences. By 0715, the duty officer had a typed directive. By 0730, Calder presented her courtesy badge at the quarterdeck desk, and the duty officer read her the directive. Her badge was downgraded to visitor escort, off wet. She was barred from any installation on the wet side of the headquarters complex, from the pier, from the SDV barn, from the harbor security boat ramps, from the dive locker, from Range 2, and from the small craft shed. She would be accompanied by Ensign Briggs at all hours when she was on the installation. She would attend the Rear Admiral's ribbon cutting at the new Family Services Center at 0900 and a Cub Scout tour of the parade ground at 10:30. She would have lunch in the family hall. She would attend the senior protocol officer's tea at 1500. She would be at quarters by 2100. She read the directive. She thanked the duty officer. She handed back the directive without speaking. The duty officer was uncomfortable. He had been a chief electrician for 12 years before he made warrant officer. He had not been uncomfortable on this quarterdeck in 3 years. She walked the courtyard alone for the next 30 minutes before the ribbon cutting. She did not consult the base map. At 0900, in front of 16 children and 4 parents, and a press kit of 9 handouts, she stood beside Ensign Briggs on the parade ground, while Briggs introduced the Family Services Center as the newest building on the base. A boy in a Star Wars t-shirt asked her what an SDV was. Briggs paused. Calder bent slightly. She thought about her answer for 2 beats. She said, "It is a small submarine that carries people very quietly." The boy asked if it was dangerous. She thought about her answer for 2 further beats. She said, "It can be." The boy was satisfied. Briggs looked at her sideways and did not ask. At 1300, she stood at the second-floor observation deck of Building 6, which sat on her allowed list because Building 6 was not on the wet side of the headquarters complex, but had a clean line of sight to Pier 4 across the harbor. She had a small black monocular she had pulled from a side pocket of her leather portfolio. She watched a Mark 11 vehicle being pulled from a transport cradle at Pier 4. She read the cradle serial. She read the cradle inspection sticker date. She read the maintenance officer's printed name on the sticker. She wrote 3 lines in the oxblood notebook. At 1500, she sat through the protocol officer's tea. 5 people. Decaf coffee. 3 kinds of biscuit. She ate 1 biscuit. She did not speak. At 1630, she took a secure call in the base library from her aide at Coronado. "Ma'am, the duty file on Captain Whitlock's signed waivers in the last 90 days is 14 waivers, 11 on safety stand-downs. The signature is the captain's. The counter-signature is Commander Bessler's. The mishap board members on the March 17th investigation were chosen by Commander Halbert. The depth log unit substitution was logged at 0750 on March 20th. The maintenance officer who signed off was Petty Officer First Class Wall, who is on terminal leave as of last Friday. Pull Wall's record. Find him. Do not approach him. I want eyes on his physical location by 1600 tomorrow." "Yes, ma'am." "And tell Reuben I will not be coming home Friday." "Yes, ma'am." She closed the secure phone. She stood up. She walked out of the base library. She turned right toward the SDV barn instead of left toward the BOQ. Her courtesy badge said "off wet." She kept walking. She did not enter the wet side. She walked the perimeter fence to the outboard end of Building 8, where the perimeter fence turned at a 90-degree angle and the chain link gave a view across the harbor to the dock at the back of the SDV barn. She stopped at the corner of Building 8. She looked across the water for 90 seconds. She looked at the brass plate that was bolted into the worn vehicle mast of an out-of-service Mark 8 at the back of the dock. She had been told the plate was there. She had not yet read the engraving. She turned around. She walked back to BOQ Building 12. Her low flats did not speak to the gravel. Master Chief Khatun Ali was on the quarterdeck again. He saw her come back through the fence gate at the end of Building 8. He watched her come down the steel ladder from the observation deck of Building 6 in a way that had stayed with him for 2 days. The rolled step, ball of the foot first, weight rolled forward and through. Submariners came down ladders like that under emissions control. SEALs came down ladders like that on a takedown when the boat had to stay quiet. He turned 1 further degree. At 0715 Wednesday morning, Master Chief Khatun Ali, alone in his small office at the back of the NS Stallard Training Detachment Building, picked up an unsecured base phone and dialed a personal cell number in California. He used the unsecured base phone deliberately because the secure phones on the base could be traced through the captain's office, and because what he was about to do did not need the captain's office to know it had happened. The line rang twice. "Reuben. Khatun. The protocol officer at Kings Bay. Visitor badge says Mitchell. Mid-40s to 50. Brown hair, clip. Walks like a boat. I want a name. I want it by lunch. You sure?" "Yes." "On it." He hung up. At 0900, Captain Whitlock called a range safety inspection at Range 2 with Ensign Briggs leading. He invited the protocol officer. He had decided, between 06 and 07, that the cleanest way to remove the problem was to put a service weapon in her hands in front of a master-at-arms detail and watch her fail to clear it. Briggs was mortified by the assignment. He read the schedule 3 times. He went to Halbert's office at 0815 and asked if he could be reassigned. Halberd looked at the schedule. Halberd looked at Briggs. Halberd said, "No." The woman in the navy blazer accepted the invitation. She arrived at range 2 at 0840. At 0930, Briggs handed her an unloaded M9 Beretta. Whitlock and Halberd stood 3 paces behind the firing line. The master-at-arms on duty, Petty Officer First Class Holst, 28, a Marine MA with 9 years in, stood at the bay. Holst had been told that the protocol officer was about to be invited to handle a sidearm and that he was to observe. Briggs's hands shook. The woman in the navy blazer's hands did not. Her palms slid over the grip, and the middle and ring fingers came up high on the grip frame at the join with the slide. Her thumb rode forward along the takedown lever. Her support hand came over the top of the strong hand, and her support thumb rode forward along the slide. Her wrists locked in a single half-second. The line of her shoulders dropped a quarter inch. She tipped the weapon a fraction, looked down into the magazine well, brought it level, drew the slide back a fraction with her support hand, and let it forward, brought it to low, ready, and set it on the table. She stepped back. She had handled the weapon for 11 seconds. Senior Chief Boudreaux, who had been crossing the bay at the back with a clipboard. At the moment, she lifted the weapon off the table, slowed his step by the length of one breath, and then did not. Holst's gaze had stayed with her grip for the full 11 seconds. He had taken in the high middle and ring fingers on the grip frame, the thumb's forward platform, the locked wrists, the dropped shoulders. He had filed all of it under the part of the mind. A master-at-arms filed the things he could not yet say out loud. Petty Officer Holst, who had watched Marines and sailors pick up service sidearms for 9 years, did not move for 4 seconds. Whitlock had been watching Briggs. Halberd had been watching Whitlock. Holst stepped back to the bay. The woman in the navy blazer thanked Ensign Briggs. She walked out of range 2. At 10:30, Master Chief Khatun Ali's personal cell vibrated on the desk in his office. He answered. He listened for 19 seconds. He hung up. He did not move for 90 seconds. Then he picked up the same phone, dialed a number he had not called in 3 years, and waited for it to ring. If you have ever watched a person handle a sidearm the way she handled it on range 2, and known that the room had just changed, and that the people in the room did not yet know it, you understand why this story is the one we are telling tonight. Subscribe to Honor Tales. The morning the rest of them figure it out is coming. At 2200 Wednesday, she locked the door of room 204 in BOQ Building 12. She took off the navy blazer. She laid it over the chair. Underneath the blazer, on a thin chain at her neck, were her dog tags. The letters on the tags were Calder, S.A. The line below was O-9. The line below that was USN. The line below that was Tbizative. She unclipped the chain. She laid the dog tags on the bedside table. She opened the leather portfolio on the desk and took out 3 things. A Naval Academy class ring, a small silver SDV pilot's wings pin she had carried in her wallet for 23 years, a folded photograph of a young man in dry suit kit on a wet pier. She laid them on the bedside table next to the dog tags. She sat on the edge of the made bed. The water at 26 feet at Nab Little Creek on the morning of June 4th, 2003, had been 48 degrees Fahrenheit. She remembered the temperature because she had been the one who logged it that morning at 0515, and because the temperature was the reason a person with a slow O2 mix could become disoriented in less than 90 seconds, and because she had told the on-scene commander that, and because the on-scene commander had told her to hold the call until he saw the surface state, and because by the time he saw the surface state, Lieutenant Avery Vance had been 26 feet under for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. She had been in the water at 4 minutes and 40 seconds. She had been the one who found him. She had been 26 years old. She had been a surface warfare lieutenant on the 3rd year of her commission. She had been the surface watch officer at the Little Creek SDV range that morning, because the duty rotation said so. She had not been a SEAL. She had not been an SDV pilot. She had been the one with the watch and the log and the radio, and she had been the one who had spoken with Avery Vance on the dry pier at 0530 as he stood smiling in his dry suit, and he had said, "Calder, you worry too much. Sun's up early. It's a good day for a dive." She had loved him without knowing she loved him. He had loved her without knowing it either. They had been Naval Academy classmates. They had been on a long, quiet path that would have, in any other story, brought them to a porch somewhere in Maryland, with 2 dogs and 3 children by 2015. The Mark 8 had not surfaced at 0715. She had called away the safety divers at 0717. The commander had told her at 0720 to hold the call. She had not held the call. She had been written up for it in the mishap board's findings. The board had concluded operator-induced disorientation, and the file had closed. She had transferred to NS-Dazalder staff 6 weeks later. She had done that quietly. She had moved through the ranks for the next 23 years for one reason. The reason was the photograph she had folded the same way for 23 years, and the brass plate, she had been told, was at the back of the dock at the SDV barn at Naval Submarine Base Kings Bay, and the names she had not allowed herself to count. She picked up the photograph. The crease at the fold had thinned the emulsion in a vertical line through the middle. Avery's face was on one side of the line. The dry pier and the morning sun were on the other. She put the photograph back inside the notebook. She picked up the secure phone. She typed a message. J3. Pull NSWC Inspector General onto the line at 06 tomorrow. Have a Force Master Chief available at Coronado standby. The depth log unit serial 312 on Mark 11 Kings Bay needs to go to the FBI tonight. Quietly. Salinas' record is to be reopened. Authorization Calder. She sent the message. She put the phone face down on the bedside table. She said one sentence aloud, to herself, the only line of dialogue she would speak in the dark. 3 minutes, 4 seconds. That is what I had. That is what I will always have. She turned off the light. Outside the window of BOQ Building 12, the wind off the St. Mary's Inlet carried the smell of brackish water and pine resin, the same smell the wind had carried 23 years ago across the parking lot at Little Creek, the morning the Mark 8 did not surface. She did not close the window. She did not sleep. The next 5 days at Naval Submarine Base Kings Bay went quietly. Captain Whitlock continued his preparations for the Atlantic exercise. He met with Commander Bessler twice. He met with Commander Halbert 4 times. He signed 2 more safety waivers. He did not invite the protocol officer to any further events. He had been informed by his executive officer on Thursday morning that the protocol officer had requested permission to extend her courtesy visit by 4 days, and he had approved the extension because his removal of her on Friday morning would, he believed, be cleaner if the file showed that he had granted her a courtesy first. He believed her presence was no longer a tactical problem. The woman in the navy blazer worked from public spaces. She used the base library. She used the chapel. She used an empty conference room in Building 6. She drank tea from a paper cup. She did not enter the wet side. She walked the perimeter every morning at 0530. She did not speak to the Master Chief on the quarterdeck. He did not speak to her. They had not needed to speak. On Sunday afternoon, she walked to the brass plate at the corner of Building 8 again. She looked at it across the water for 90 seconds. She did not cross. On Monday night, Captain Whitlock signed a written order on base letterhead. The order directed the master-at-arms shift, leading from 0630 Tuesday morning, to physically escort the visitor, Mitchell S., off the installation on the grounds that she had been impersonating Navy personnel in restricted areas. He cited 2 unsigned incident reports that he had drafted himself on Saturday. He signed the order at 2300. He used the base letterhead because base letterhead carried more institutional weight than a typed memo. He timed it for first light because first light was when public ceremony at the headquarters complex was at its sharpest. He did not know that Master Chief Cotton Ali had made a 3rd call on Monday afternoon to a number he had not dialed in 3 years, and that the person on the other end had said 2 sentences. At 0630 Tuesday morning, May 5th, 3 master-at-arms knocked on the door of room 204 in BOQ Building 12. Senior Petty Officer Holst was the lead. He had the captain's order in his hand. He was uncomfortable. He had been the master-at-arms on the bay at Range 2 on Wednesday morning. The woman in the navy blazer opened the door fully dressed. Navy blazer, gray slacks, low flats, hair in the silver clip, leather portfolio in her left hand. She read the order. She said nothing. She stepped into the corridor, Holst's right hand on her upper arm. Light contact, regulation distance, but contact. She permitted it. Her gaze took the corridor in once. 2 cameras she had not previously noted. 3 exits. 1 master-at-arms she had not seen on Holst's shift roster. His name tape said, Reardon. She filed it. They walked the corridor. They walked the 4 flights of stairs. They walked the courtyard path. The morning sky was the color of pewter. The flag was being raised at the headquarters mast. The buffer in the hall on the 2nd floor of Building 5 hummed. At 0645, they reached the headquarters quarterdeck. Captain Whitlock was waiting at the duty desk. He had positioned himself there 10 minutes earlier. He had a smile that he had rehearsed in the mirror at home at 0530 that morning. Commander Halberd was 3 paces behind him, looking at the deck plates. Commander Bessler was 3 further paces behind Halberd, looking at the quarterdeck overhead. The duty officer of the watch, the same warrant officer who had been uncomfortable on Tuesday, stood at the rail at parade rest. Captain Whitlock began to read the trespass notice aloud. Per the authority of the commanding officer, Naval Submarine Base, Kings Bay, dated 06 May the 5th of the year of our Lord. 2026, the subject named Mitchell, S, is hereby barred from this installation for impersonation of United States Navy personnel in restricted areas, and the master-at-arms is directed to remove the subject from the installation by 0700 and to log the action with the duty officer of the watch. He paused. He looked at her over the page. She smiled. The smile was small. It was private. It was almost amused. It was the only time she had smiled in 9 days. Captain Whitlock's cadence broke for the first time since Monday afternoon. He did not know what to do with it. He picked the cadence up again. He kept reading. The smile did not change. She spoke once. Understood. The trespass notice concluded at 0658. Whitlock looked at Holst. He nodded. Holst's hand on her upper arm tightened a half-pound. She reached up to her hair. She removed the silver clip. She slid the clip onto the inside waistband of her gray slacks at the 4 o'clock position, where a person who carried a sidearm carried one. The motion was automatic. Her hair came down in a single line to her collarbone. Holst saw the motion. His hand opened a 1/4 inch. The grip was gone. Calder kept walking. Captain Devereaux Whitlock looked at Vice Admiral Samantha Calder, though he did not yet know the second half of that sentence, and his trespass notice fell silent in his hand. She smiled. It was small. It was private. He did not know what it meant. He kept reading anyway, because he did not know what else to do. And the smile stayed. At 0700, Captain Whitlock had called a courtyard muster. He had drawn the NS training detachment cadre, the visiting SDV team, the base divers, the harbor security boat crew, the off-watch master-at-arms, and the duty roster into formation. 3 ranks, approximately 40 bodies in working khaki and physical training gear. They stood facing the quarterdeck rail. The flag at the headquarters mast had reached the truck at 0658 and was now at full hoist. The morning had warmed enough that the dew on the courtyard concrete had begun to lift off in faint steam. The captain stood at the quarterdeck rail with halberd to his right. Bessler was in the front rank, 3 paces back, in service khaki, because Bessler was the visiting commander of an off-base detachment and did not stand muster with the base in PT gear. Calder stood beside Holst at the left end of the formation, hands clasped in front of her. Master Chief Khatun Ali was at the right end of the 3rd rank. His face was unreadable, his chin was up, his hands were at his sides. The cuff of his khaki blouse was folded the regulation half-inch, and the cuff sat the regulation distance from the heel of his palm. Captain Whitlock began the trespass notice a second time. Same language. He had decided that the institutional memory of his removal of the protocol officer would be cleaner if the cadre heard the notice read aloud in formation. He reached the first comma. He paused for effect. Master Chief Khatun Ali stepped 2 paces forward out of the 3rd rank. His boots struck the courtyard concrete at parade cadence. The right rank turned its eyes a quarter degree. He executed a hand salute that had been on his right hand for 26 years. His voice carried to the gate guard, to the BOQ, to the quarterdeck. He said 4 words. "Admiral on deck, sir." The Trudet cadre snapped to attention as one. The visiting SDV team snapped to attention. The base divers snapped to attention. The harbor security boat crew, who had been standing at the back of the 3rd rank, snapped to attention. Petty Officer Holst, beside Calder, came to attention. Senior Chief Boudreau, who had been standing on the perimeter walkway with a coffee cup he had been carrying for 9 minutes, came to attention and set the cup on the ground without breaking. The duty officer at the quarterdeck rail came to attention. The gate guard at the headquarters gate, 50 yards across the courtyard, came to attention. 40 hands went up in salute. The salute did not waver. Captain Devereaux Whitlock was the only uniformed body in the courtyard who was not at attention. Commander Bessler, in the front rank, came to attention 3/4 of a second after the rest of the formation. His face began the cycle. Confusion, disbelief, recognition, horror. The cycle took 6 seconds. By the 7th second, he had closed his eyes. Captain Whitlock's face cycled in the same order, 4 seconds later. He spoke 1 word. The word was hollow. Admiral. In the 2nd rank, Petty Officer 2nd Class Quint Mackler held the salute the way a man held a salute he had wanted to hold for 51 days. His eyes were on the back of the captain's head. He did not blink. He did not breathe out for the count of 3. Beside him, a chief warrant officer from Harbor Security held the same salute and looked at nothing in particular and felt the morning settle into a shape that the next 30 years of his life were going to remember. Vice Admiral Samantha Calder returned the salute. Her hand at the salute was the hand of an officer who had saluted at parade for 27 years. The angle of her fingers, the line of her elbow, the precise 45-degree set of her forearm were not the gestures of a protocol officer. She held the salute for the count of 2. She lowered her hand. She stepped forward to the quarterdeck rail. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her voice carried to the gate. Master Chief, secure the quarterdeck and take command of the watch. Petty Officer Holst, stand down. Commander Halbert, you are the executive officer of this installation. You are now the acting commanding officer of Naval Submarine Base Kings Bay, pending change of command. Captain Whitlock, you are relieved. Commander Bessler, report to Operations Conference Room 2. Master-at-Arms detail, please escort Captain Whitlock to his quarters. He will not be detained. He will be confined to his quarters pending the investigation. Treat him with courtesy. Carry on, gentlemen. 40 hands stayed up. The salute did not waver. The wind off the inlet did not move the flag at the quarterdeck staff. Vice Admiral Samantha Calder walked between the ranks toward Operations Conference Room 2, and the courtyard did not move until she had gone in. By 0830, Vice Admiral Calder was at the head of the conference table in Operations Conference Room 2. Commander Halbert was at her right. The NSWC Inspector General was on a secure line. Master Chief Reuben Holm of the NSWIC Command, Master Chief Office, was on a second line from Coronado. Calder set the oxblood notebook on the table. She opened it to the page that read 312. Commander Halbert, you are not in trouble. You also have a choice to make in the next 90 seconds. Tell me everything you know about the waiver chain, and you walk out of this with a star in 18 months. Withhold anything, and I write a different recommendation. Take your time. Halbert told her everything in 11 minutes. The waiver chain, the Annapolis classmate friendship, the exercise tempo pressure from the type commander, the 2 unsigned incident reports Whitlock had drafted himself on Saturday night and held in his desk drawer, the way Bessler had reframed the original mishap board and chosen its members, the fact that Petty Officer First Class Wall, the maintenance officer who had signed off on the depth log unit swap, had been promised an early-out promotion in exchange for the signature and was on terminal leave in Pensacola Beach. He gave the whole record in the order he had been carrying it. He had been carrying it for 91 days. When he was done, he put both hands flat on the conference table and waited for her to speak. She did not speak for 1 full minute. Then she said, "Thank you, Commander. Stand by." At 1300, Master Chief Khatun Ali brought Commander Bessler to Operations Conference Room 2 under courtesy escort. Bessler sat across from Calder. He did not speak. She read to him the depth log unit serial discrepancy, the magazine lot recall, the witness list manipulation, the 14 safety waivers, the maintenance officer on terminal leave. She offered him a sheet of paper and a pen. He wrote 1 line. "I signed 11 waivers I should not have signed. I knew what I was doing." He signed it. He pushed the paper across the table. Calder read it. She did not look at him. She nodded to the Master Chief. The Master Chief opened the door. Bessler was escorted out. At 1530, Petty Officer Second Class Quint Mackler, visiting SDV team operator, made a personal phone call from the duty desk of the visiting SDV team's office on the headquarters' 2nd floor. He called Walter Reed Army Medical Center. He asked for Petty Officer First Class Mateo Salinas. He waited on hold for 90 seconds. He said 1 sentence. "They cleared your record, brother. Operator error is off the file. Vice Admiral Calder pulled it herself this morning." Salinas did not speak. He sat on the edge of the hospital bed. He looked at the wall. His sister, in the chair by the window, watched his face. She had been waiting for 90 days for his face to do what it did. He set the phone down. He pressed both his palms flat against the bed beside him. He cried for the first time since March. His sister stood. She crossed the room. She put her left hand on his right shoulder. She did not speak. He did not move for 2 minutes. Then he looked up at her and asked who had pulled the file. His sister read the text Mackler had sent her after the call. Vice Admiral Samantha Calder, NSWC, Coronado. Salinas said the name twice. The second time was a whisper. Then he asked for his uniform. Sometimes the patient ones get the smile. Sometimes the patient ones get the salute. And sometimes, if you stay long enough, you get to see both. Subscribe to Honor Tales. The next mission is already moving. At 1700, Vice Admiral Calder walked alone from Operations Conference Room 2 through the wet side passageway she had not been allowed to enter for 9 days. The master-at-arms at the wet side hatch was Reardon, the name she had filed in the BOQ corridor at 0630. He came to attention and saluted as she approached. She returned the salute. She passed through the hatch. The hatch closed behind her. At 1900, she stood alone on the dock at the back of the SDV barn at Naval Submarine Base Kings Bay. The sun was 3 fingers above the western tree line. The wind off the St. Mary's Inlet carried the smell of brackish water and pine resin. An out-of-service Mark 8 swimmer delivery vehicle had been pulled out of the water in 1996 and turned into a memorial. The vehicle sat on a cradle at the back of the dock. The worn vehicle mast had a brass plate bolted to it. She ran the tips of her fingers along the engraved letters. In memory, Lieutenant Avery R. Vance, USN, SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 2, 4 June. 2003, fair winds. She stood for one breath. She did not say anything aloud. Her secure phone vibrated in her blazer pocket. She read the message on the screen. "Tour's not over, ma'am. Pearl is dirtier." See. She closed the screen. She did not look at the brass plate again. She turned and started walking back along the dock toward the helicopter pad on the far side of the SDV barn, where the bird from Coronado had been turning since 1500. The smell of brackish water and pine resin lifted off the inlet. The wind on the back of her neck was cold for May. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.